Hi, welcome back to the Other 51. Very excited to be back here with our first episode of 2025. My name is Brian Moritz. Thank you for being here. Thank you for finding us wherever you find us. And we couldn't have a better guest for our first episode. He is a columnist at the Philadelphia Inquirer, a multiple-time author, multiple-time guest on the show, and author of the new book, Magic in the Air, The Myth, the Mystery, and the Soul of the Slam Dunk. Our old friend, Mike Sielski. Welcome back to the Other 51, man.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate you having me on.
I appreciate you doing this, and start right off into the book, which is such a fun book. It was so fun to read. I learned a lot. I thought I knew a lot about basketball. I think I do know a lot about basketball, but still able to learn a lot about this specific part of basketball. And so I'm always interested when I talk to writers. I know you've done this a few times before now, but having written the book over a number of years and reported it, and now that it's out, what's this time like for you, seeing it kind of get out into the world after it being like a labor of love for you for so long?
Great question. It's a combination of uh, thrills and enjoyment and utter anxiety. Because, as anyone who's written a book will tell you, even the slightest little bit of, I liked this part more than this other part, or, this one part you should have done a little bit more of this other thing, like is like a dagger to the heart because you haven't, as you said, have invested so much time and energy into this project. So, on the one hand, I'm enjoying being able to talk about the book and see people's reaction to it. On the other hand, I'm like walking around in like a crouch, like a turtle shell, in that, oh God, if somebody says something other than I thought it was the greatest book in the history of books, I'm really going to be upset.
It's somewhere. I won't go so far as to say it's the greatest book in the history of books, but it's up there. It's very good. It's very good. So I wanted to get into into it and start off with the slam dunk is a very, it's funny because it's a very specific thing to write a book about. And I think what's interesting is the subtitle, and I want to spend a little time on that: the myth, the mystery, and the soul of the slam dunk. And I think I found that interesting as I was reading it and thinking about it for today, is that it's not the history of the slam dunk. It's not like the list of the best slam dunks or the best dunkers on that. So can you kind of walk me through it? It really does feel like a theme and almost a mission statement for the book in a way in the title. How did you land on that as kind of like the guiding subtitle principle for the book?
Because I didn't want to do all those things that you just cited. I didn't want this to be 300 pages of highlights. I wanted this book to surprise people in its depth and in the way it's written and in the topics we cover. And I tell the reader that in the preface right up front, that there are going to be basketball players and moments that you probably expect to be in this book, or at least covered in greater depth, that are not in this book or not covered in greater depth. I'll give you an example. Darryl Dawkins, right? Famous dunker from the 70s and 80s, Chocolate Thunder, shattering backboards. I spent very little time on Darryl Dawkins, in part because I wasn't sure what new I could say about him.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't sure of how, for lack of a better way of putting it, important he was to the story that I wanted to tell here. What I wanted to do was take the dunk and use it as a vehicle to examine how basketball has changed and how American culture and society have changed over time. And I also wanted to introduce readers to figures within the sport and moments within the sport that haven't been covered in the depth of, say, a Michael Jordan or Julius Erving, even though those two are really big parts of the book. So I was inspired by Tyler Kepner, our mutual friend, who did a book a few years ago called K, in which he
Mm-hmm.
told the history of baseball through the pitches that pitchers throw. So
It's a
there's a
great
chapter
book.
on great book and a great idea, like chapter on the fastball. And you get into Nolan Ryan and Randy Johnson and Bob Feller, et cetera, et cetera. Chapter on the curveball. And I thought there might be something to do similarly with basketball. And I settled on the dunk, and I was really kind of thrilled to find it took me to all these interesting places.
Do you remember a moment when you're like, my next book's going to be the dunk? Do you remember like when that kind of came to you?
Yeah, I kind of do actually. I had Tyler's book on my mind, and my agent was soliciting ideas from me to follow up on The Rise, the book about Kobe. And one day I was sitting in front of my laptop, and I was thinking about Tyler's book, and I had kind of a Jones to do a book that wasn't just a straight through narrative. I wanted to do a book that in which each chapter was kind of its own entity, but if you read them in succession, they would feel like a narrative.
Mhm.
And when I thought about the dunk and telling the history of basketball through the dunk, I started to do a little bit of research and I thought, ooh, I can do a chapter on this guy and I could do a chapter on this period and I could do this, that, and the other thing. And it just kind of hit me that it would be a lot of fun. And as I said, it would take me to places that um, I wouldn't necessarily have thought to go through and that readers wouldn't necessarily think to go to.
What was, there are a lot of those places in the book, but can you think of one that was like, oh, I would have never gone to this place, whether specific or like research wise, if it hadn't been this book? Is there one that kind of stands out to you?
Yes, Amarillo, Texas. So, one of the chapters, one of the early chapters in the book is about a guy named Joe Fortenberry, who is largely credited with being the figure who popularized the dunk nationally. He was a member of the 1936 U.S. Olympic team. That Olympics was the first that featured basketball. It was also summer games, anyway, were held in Berlin when Hitler was in power. So Joe Fortenberry was from Happy, Texas, in West Texas, and his son still lives down in West Texas in Amarillo. Oliver, his name is. So I got in touch with Oliver and I flew down there for a day to speak to Oliver and have him show me around the town. And he's got all his dad's memorabilia and tons of research and things like that. And as I get into in the book, while we were down there, Oliver took me out to the plot of land where his the farm was where his dad grew up, and nailed to the side of the family barn was a hoop that Joe Fortenberry learned how to play basketball on. And so we drove out into this wide expanse of brown Texas earth, and there's the farm out in the distance, and Oliver's telling me that's where Daddy's farm was, and we had off-roaded out there in a rented Rav4, and when we parked the RAV4 to walk out onto this field, the last thing Oliver said to me before we stepped out of the vehicle was, "Watch out for rattlesnakes, truly." And I'm like, I thought to myself, is he being serious or is he just like trying to tweak a Yankee, somebody who's not familiar with West Texas? But needless to say, I kept my feet more towards the ground than I did out looking out at that farm in the distance. So that was pretty fun and kind of the last place I would have thought to go. The other place was Murray, Kentucky, which is where John Morant, the star for the Memphis Grizzlies, went to college. I spent a couple of days out there, and that was similar in that way. People out there were very impressed that a big city writer from Philadelphia would come to Murray to learn about Ja, and that was kind of jarring to hear that because I obviously would never think of myself in those terms.
Well, and it's funny to think of too in 2024, 2025 that people still think that, right? I think there's a sense that like the world has gotten smaller, that we're able to read everybody, and to think that, a big city writer coming to Murray State, which is a small school, but not like an invisible basketball school. Like they're in the tournament almost every year. That's just that struck me as very funny that that's still out there.
Yeah, it's out there in full force, and it helps explain why John Morant is. I mean, he walks on air during games, and he walks on water in Murray, Kentucky,
Hmm.
right? Like that's the best way to put it. And what was funny about my visit there, it came at the middle of a period where Morant was really going through some personal issues that led to him getting suspended by the NBA. There was the sense that he was close to throwing his career away, and yet you would not have known that from the people in Murray, Kentucky. They were just so devoted to him and so invested in his success that they couldn't wrap their minds around the idea that Ja had done something wrong.
So the Texas story gets at something that I found really interesting at the start of the book, and I wanted I was curious about. So you kind of walk through the who the first person was to dunk, and the legends and the stories around that, and the first person to dunk in a game, and the people to popularize it, and all of that. And I found myself thinking, as a writer myself, like that is such a delightful rabbit hole, but I could absolutely see myself getting absolutely derailed. Like I need to have the first person to dunk in this book. It's got to be there, and then it just that is a rabbit hole that you're never going to be able to fully find the end to. So I'm curious from your perspective, how did you feel that, and how did you kind of balance finding that out with, like you say, the myth of it, that it's, much more the story around it than the actual facts of it?
All right, to answer the first part of your question, yes, I was teetering on the edge of that rabbit hole. I really was.
Mhm.
And I've had some people who are familiar with the book, or at least aware of it, ask me, so who's the first person to dunk? And I'm like, there's no way to know that. And such things weren't documented back in the day in the way they would be now. So you're right. You can drive yourself crazy trying to figure that out. What I ended up settling on was making a good faith effort to try to figure out, okay, who's first credited with the dunk. You can only go so far in terms of that research. And I ended up settling on some chapters about individuals who I just thought were pretty interesting. That was really all you could do. I'm not trying to write a an academic piece of history here, and to settle debates or anything like that. When you said it was a really fun read, that makes me feel good, because that's what I want this to be. I want people
Mhm.
to learn a few things. As I said, I want them to be surprised that it's deeper than just like, hey, Michael Jordan was awesome and he dunked a lot. Um, and I want them to kind of come on this journey with me as I try to trace the dunk and its history and et cetera, and the funness of it, the enjoyment of it. So if I didn't figure out exactly who did it first, that was okay with me. It was enough
Mhm.
to kind of come close.
You mentioned, again, we were talking about the Texas chapter, and there are parts throughout the book, the Jaw chapter, the Texas chapter, a couple other places where you write in first person. You switch to kind of a first person style of it. And I'm just curious, why those places? Like, when did you decide I'm going to write first person? When did you decide I'm going to write third person? Kind of walk me through that process and how you decided when to do what.
Great question. Great writing question. So largely, I wrote in first person or used first person to distinguish when someone I spoke to spoke directly to me, or and distinguish that from quotes that I gained from newspapers or archives or other books, things like that. I wanted to make it clear to the reader when Dr. J was talking to me, or when Oliver Fortenberry was talking to me about his father, separate from a quote Joe Fortenberry might have had in Time magazine in 1936, or Dr. J might have had to Philadelphia magazine in 2010, or something along those lines. So that was a big reason for it. The other was, to be honest, I kind of wanted to stretch that writing muscle a little bit. Uh, I tend not to write in first person, or at least I have tended not to in my books and in my career at the Inquirer. But I'm finding I'm doing it more and more. It's a little more casual. And in a book like this, where you are taking the reader on a journey that you, the writer and author, are taking yourself, sometimes it's okay to give them that sense of intimacy.
Mhm.
Oh, okay, like I thought there might be rattlesnakes in this West Texas farmland, piece of West Texas farmland. Let the reader feel that. And it was something I had not done in a book before, but I liked the casualness that it brought to parts of the book. It made it feel, I think, a little breezier and easier to read.
And it's that connection with the reader. It's very much like, this is not just the story of the slam dunk. This is my journey through looking at the slam dunk and bringing the reader along with it. It can be a really powerful. I mean, it can be overused, obviously, but it was a really, in the right setting, it's really powerful to be able to use. Was that a hard muscle to get back into after years of newspaper writing?
Yeah, it can be. It can be. But I'm seeing more and more writers who I really admire doing this more and more. And I wonder if it has something to do with the lack of access that we get as sports writers
Second,
anymore.
yeah.
Um, where it's not just taken for granted that, oh, you will get to talk to this athlete or his mother or father or the coach or whatever. So you want to show the reporting that you did more. One of the writers, friend of mine, friend of yours, who does this very well is Wright Thompson,
Mhm.
right? Like he's able to meld writing about the past with his efforts to unearth that past. And I like the way he does it. And it was something I kind of aspired to do in this.
So I think one of the most powerful ways you use that was the specific chapter on the NCAA banning the dunk in the late '60s and the early '70s. Thank you for the Bob Lanier reference. I have to reference it. Have to contractually obligated to note that as a Bono guy.
Hey, look, I know you and Woj and Vac, Adrian Wojnarowski and Mike Vaccaro, to those who are not intimately familiar with St. Bonaventure alumni, are going to be disappointed that I did not refer to Olean, New York as the birthplace of the slam dunk in this book. I get it, okay?
We'll
But you
forgive you.
guys
We'll
are,
forgive you.
yeah, you guys are just going to have to live with it and also live with the fact that my LaSalle Explorers beat you guys earlier this season.
It's a weird year. It's such a weird year. Anyway, um, but there's a lot I want to ask about that chapter. But at the end of it, you have an email exchange with the NCAA where you're trying to get access to Walter Byers, who was the head of the NCAA, his archive, basically trying to figure out why they really banned the dunk. And the NCAA wouldn't give it to you, and you have your emails in there. And it was so great because knowing you as I do, but also knowing you as a journalist, like you can sense your frustration coming off the page. And I assume, was that the reason you have that in there, was be like, you're really not going to let me look at this? Okay, then people are basically, we know what people are going to think now. You're not
Right.
letting me have this. Is that the one of the reasons you did it like that?
That's absolutely one of the reasons I did it. The other was I wanted to be as completely transparent
Mhm.
on that topic and on my efforts to get to that archival material as I could. I didn't want the NCAA coming back to me after the book had come out saying something different from what they had said to me in the moment.
Mhm.
And I wanted to be clear to them, look, you are not allowing me access to Walter Byers' archives, even though, and you'll learn this if I read the book, I had interviewed Walter Byers' son, Fritz, who is an attorney and who supported me in unearthing those archives. He had no issue with me looking for them. And still, the NCAA said no. So I wanted to make it clear to the reader here were my good faith efforts to try to get to these archives, figure out exactly was there any correspondence between Walter Byers and other people involved in college basketball at the time that led them and that explained why they wanted the dunk banned? And the NCAA wouldn't let me see it. So, okay, you're not going to let me see it. That's fine. I'm going to tell everyone why you didn't let me see it, and
Mhm.
I'm going to lay it out in your own words. So far, I haven't heard from them. Maybe I will, maybe I won't, but there it is. I mean, those emails and my attempts are verbatim in the book. And so the NCAA can deal with the repercussions, whatever they might be.
And for those of you who read the book will get this, but the unspoken implication is that it was banned because it was primarily used by young black players and was seen as flamboyant, and this was kind of a control mechanism. Am I right?
Yes, you're 100% right. And look, there were other reasons given at the time, some of which, for the people who offered them, probably came in good faith. The idea that players needed to be protected, backboards were going to be broken, rims were going to be broken. It was a safety issue. But the bottom line is, this measure banning this one act in basketball was not contemplated until players like Lou Alcindor and other players like him from the schoolyards and the cities of America were reaching college basketball and taking the sport to places it hadn't been. So it's very, very difficult to believe that the race of the players who were bringing dunking to the forefront in the 60s wasn't taken into consideration when the ban went into effect.
I was it blew me away when I read the David Thompson chapter. David Thompson, if you don't know, star player, NC State back in the early 70s, and like you want to get old people like misty-eyed and talking about like wistfully, you bring up David Thompson, and every one of them, he is a myth. I mean, just absolutely myth. And I didn't realize, it didn't put it together until I read your book, that he never dunked, and he is known as like the prototypical Jordan, the prototypical Dr. J, like the guy, and he never dunked, and that's crazy to me to realize it.
Yeah, and I think that had to be a turning point in getting the ban lifted because to this day, David Thompson is regarded as the greatest player in ACC history. Like exactly like you said, if if you talk to anyone who saw him play, I quote this longtime sports writer Mark Wicker in the book saying DT was God. Okay, and Wicker was an undergrad at the University of North Carolina at the time who got to see him play. So the fact that Thompson, while he was at NC State, could not dunk and couldn't show the full flourishing of his skills as a basketball player, right at the same time that college basketball is starting to ascend into a major sport in this country with big time TV deals. And, it's outdrawing the NBA on television in the 70s. I think that persuaded people like, look, this is silly. Like, we are holding our own sport back. It's like banning the home run from baseball or the forward pass from football. Like, what are we doing here? And so it went away. And I think Thompson, whether people admitted it at the time or not, was a big impetus for that.
There's a lot of NC State in this book too, between David Thompson and the 1983 title game, the Lorenzo Charles dunk. I mean, shocking how much it was just very funny. Like, oh, NC State plays very prominently in the history of the dunk.
Yeah, it does. And that gets back to what we were talking about earlier, Brian, about um, surprising people,
Hmm.
right? Like when you think of ACC basketball, NC State is not necessarily the first program that leaps to mind. Certainly not before Duke or North Carolina. But the fact is that Thompson played there at a pivotal moment in college basketball history. And then, of course, you have the moment in the 1983 championship game in a Final Four that is defined by dunking
Hmm.
with Phi
Houston.
Slamma Jamma and Houston and Louisville, which has been a program that has built itself around high flyers for the last few years. And it's the only championship game to be won by a dunk by Lorenzo Charles. And it happens in the most unlikely way you could possibly conceive of. So
Hmm.
that to me was really interesting. And that chapter is centered, of course, on Lorenzo Charles and who he was as a player and how he ended up in that position
Hmm.
to create this moment that's probably the greatest moment in NCAA tournament history.
Well, and not just the dunk, but then you tell the story of his post dunk in his life. And it was a very poignant story. The way I think it kind of his life unfolded in a way that we know him from the highlight and the moment, but then going deeper into that, I thought was very powerful.
Thanks. And yeah, I mean, look, the Survive and Advance documentary, the 30 for 30 that ESPN produced back in 2013, I think is the most watched 30 for 30 in the history of that series. But it really doesn't spend very much time on Lorenzo Charles. It spends a lot of time on Derek Wittenberg, who was involved in the project, spends a lot of time on Jim Valvano, but it really doesn't dive into Lorenzo Charles's life, who he was as a player, what his existence and day to day life was like at NC State. And that was one of the more kind of enjoyable parts of the research. Is I went down to Raleigh for a couple of days, spent some time with his former teammates, spent some time on campus, and I really enjoyed telling Lowe's story.
Is there a story that you tried to find that you couldn't, or that didn't make, like, what's the deleted scene? What's the chapter that was for space or for whatever reporting, writing reason just didn't make it? Is there a story that you wanted to tell that you just couldn't couldn't pull the trigger on, or had to leave the book for some reason?
Yeah, I mentioned Daryl Dawkins early on, and I thought the only interesting, really new and interesting angle to take on him was uh, his family, was his widow and his son Nick, who is a very good football player, has been a very good football player, offensive lineman at Penn State, and neither his widow nor Nick would speak to me. I tried to reach out to him, we just couldn't connect, and so it didn't come off. But I mean, I would have liked to have included something more about Daryl Dawkins in the book through that prism, but I didn't want to rehash, Chocolate Thunder and all the names for all the dunks. I felt like that fell into the category of the thing that everybody expects to be in this book, and what am I going to say new
Hmm.
about it? So there was that, and then the other thing I would say would be Jerome Lane,
Hmm.
who is known for Bill Raftery's amazing call back in 1988.
Hmm.
Send it in, Jerome. And I wasn't able to get in touch with him. And to be honest, Brian, the research for this book was different from the Kobe book or any other of my
Oh,
previous
how
books
so?
in that each chapter felt like its own individual book when it
Hmm.
came to research and writing. It wasn't this continuous narrative like, okay, you're just going to tell the story of Kobe Bryant's early life. Start when he's a kid, go through till he turns 18. This was, okay, do a deep dive on Lorenzo Charles, finish. Start again, do a deep dive on David Thompson,
Hmm.
finish, start again. And so once it became clear with a subject like Daryl Dawkins or Jerome Lane that I wasn't getting off to a fast start, I kind of had to abandon it and move on to something else.
What was that research process like? You know, it's a very it's very, like you said, deep dive and specific, but also you're writing for like one chapter or one story. So what was the how did you research each person? What was that process like?
I mean, at the start, you find everything you possibly can. I cannot tell you how many hours I spent on newspapers.com. My wife wants to kill me for printing out old newspaper article after newspaper article. I'm like, Jeff Pearlman does the same
Hmm.
thing for researching his books. He spends a small fortune in paper and printer ink, and I do the same thing.
Okay.
I think they know me at Staples now, around the corner from my house. But I did a lot of that, and then I figured out, okay, what angle am I going to take in this particular chapter? So for David Thompson, for instance, there's a lot of time spent on the alley oop and the idea that he and his teammate Monty Toe, if not pioneered it, then brought it to the forefront of basketball. You know, throwing the ball near the rim so that Thompson could lay it in, not dunk it like you said, but lay it in. And so anything I found about the alley oop took priority over just about anything else. With Julius Erving, it was much more about the mystery of Dr. J before he joined the Sixers and really became a national and international figure. I was really intrigued by the fact that he played at UMass and nobody really had seen him play in college. And then he gets to the ABA, and the ABA isn't as widely watched as the NBA is. So even though Dr. J's playing in New York and he's playing in those Rucker tournament games in the summertime, you kind of had to be there to understand how great he was. And I wanted people to appreciate that. So it was like lots and lots of research about this particular subject and then whittling it down to this one particular thread that I wanted to run through that particular chapter.
And you mentioned this at the beginning, you know, each chapter is its own standalone kind of discrete thing, but there's the theme running through that. And what kind of a challenge was that for you as a writer with a book, that it's not just 13 individual essays about the slam dunk? Kind of how did you work to kind of subtly in a way work that through line throughout the whole book?
Well, here I have to give a ton of credit to my editor at St. Martin's Press, Pete Wolverton, because when I sent him multiple drafts of the manuscript, and each time I would send it back, he would return it to me with the same thing. A couple changes in phrasing here and there in various chapters to connect one to the next, maybe a couple references to modern day players who were comparable to players that I was writing about from years and years ago. You know, for instance, there's a chapter about a guy named Bob Curlin, who was credited with being the first college player to dunk. He was a 7-footer at Oklahoma State in the 1940s. And Pete suggested, hey, put a reference to Zach Edey in there so that people have an idea of the kind of player you're talking about. But even then, the connection wasn't quite there. And I could feel it too. And then finally, it hit me. I got the idea of starting each chapter with a couple of sentences or a full paragraph that kind of summarized why I was focusing on this particular topic or person in this chapter and how it connected to the previous chapter. And once I did that, Pete was like, boom, that's it. That's what we need to do.
Okay.
Because that it made it so easy for the reader to say, oh, okay, now I understand why he went from Bob Curland to this playground legend in New York.
Hmm.
Okay. Where at first there wouldn't seem to be any connection there at all. This couple of sentences explains the connection. And once I did that, everything kind of fell into place.
So, looking back on it now, what is it about the slam dunk specifically that is so interesting to you as a writer and as a sports writer?
A few things. Number one, from a historical standpoint, and I point this out in the book, the rise of the dunk takes you throughout the journey of basketball and really America, right? The dunk it's not a coincidence that the slam dunk is banned in high school and college basketball in 1967. Take
Hmm.
5 seconds to think about what's going on in America in 1967 with the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War, and the idea that the institutions in the country are under assault. And you get the impulse amongst the power structure in sports to say, well, we can't have this quelling up. We can't have this disorder quelling up in our sport. So that's one aspect of it. And of course, it takes you, into American culture, and race. There's a chapter on Ron Shelton and white men can't jump. And I tie that to Mac McClung, who's won the slam dunk contest the last couple of years as a short white guy. So there are all those racial implications too that I think are really fun to kind of discuss and explore. And then it takes you, I think, to pro basketball today, in which the dunk is viewed primarily as an act of function and not form. I personally think there's a lot of fun that has been taken away from the NBA, from watching NBA basketball, because of the accent on the three-point shot and efficiency, and the decline of flair and creativity and spontaneity amongst the stars of the sport. I hate to sound like an old dude here, like a Gen Xer who wishes things were the way they were back in the 80s and 90s. But the fact is, the fun of watching the NBA in that era was seeing what Michael Jordan was going to do with the ball in a breakaway, or Dominique Wilkins, or Spud Webb. And the slam dunk contest at that time mattered. It meant something. It was the best players in the league going head to head for supremacy, for individual supremacy. I mean, there's a chapter on the 1988 dunk contest between Jordan and Dominique, and even Spud Webb at Chicago Stadium. And it might as well have been Game 7 of the NBA Finals for those guys. And that's missing from the sport now. And it's just not as much fun, I don't think. And so it allowed me, following the dunk allowed me to go to all these places and touch on all these topics and debates that are intrinsic to basketball, that are kind of intrinsic to our collective discussions about popular culture and history. And it just made it for a fun book to write.
Do you have a favorite dunk of all time? Well, let's do this. One that you've seen, because obviously we can see all the videos of favorite dunks. Do you have one favorite dunk that you've seen in person?
I think not in person. Let me think. Favorite dunk in person. That's a great question. I would have to think about that a while. My favorite dunk personally of all time is Julius Erving's dunk in January of '83, the rock the baby to sleep, rock the cradle against the Lakers, because of what it ended up portending, right? The Sixers went on and won the championship that year. They'd been building to that for a long time. They ended up sweeping the Lakers in the finals. And that rock the cradle by Dr. J kind of shows, okay, this Sixers team really is different. He does it over Michael Cooper, who's one of the greatest defenders in NBA, wing defenders in NBA history. So yeah, that would be I think that's the all-time greatest stuff.
All right. And I know we're running up on time, so we'll get you out of here with the question I ask everybody. What's the best thing you've read lately?
The best thing I've read lately is a novel that I should have read a long time ago. It's called Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. It has now been made into a movie starring Cillian Murphy. It is a novella. It is about a father of five, a husband and father of five in Ireland in the 1980s, and his encounter with an orphanage that's run by Catholic nuns at that time. It is breathtakingly beautiful in how it's written. It is thought-provoking. I read it in a couple of hours, and I cannot recommend it highly.
Very nice. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes. We'll also have links to pre-order your book on Amazon, bookshop.org, all the places that people can pre-order it. And Mike, I appreciate you taking the time. Well done on the book, and thanks for being here.
Brian, I was looking forward to this interview, and you did not disappoint, man. Thank you so much. This was a blast.
Thanks for listening to The Other 51. A special thanks to Mike Sielski for taking time out of his Super Bowl prep to chat. You can pre-order Mike's book at the links in the show notes. It's really, really, really great. Thanks for listening. Jen Moritz does our graphics. Our theme is by Ellie Moritz. I'm Brian, and I'll talk to you next time.